Proud Boys trial, day 49. We continue on in the case. The defense is presenting. We have Carmen Hernandez, who's got her case in chief in front of the jury. Remember, she is the defense attorney for Zachary Real. The case is under review, and it's being brought to us courtesy of our friend Roger Parloff, who is on Twitter, telling us he's going to be live tweeting this, and he doesn't want to jinx anything here, but it's looking like maybe we might be done with evidence this week. What? That's going to be very fast, if that's true. And so we had a little bit of delays this morning. We know that there is this battle over Ray Epps and whether Ray Epps is going to be called in to testify. And I'll very likely unpack this in another video because there's several motions that are flying around on this, as well as a subpoena. So we'll fast forward through that. But this morning in court, there was a delay. Everybody was there except, guess who? Carmen Hernandez, Zachary Real's defense attorney. Everybody's going, where the heck is Carmen? Where the heck did she go? Well, it turns out we're still waiting. 51 minutes go by and she's still not here. Now, Roger says, there was apparently some sort of a problem with the Red Line Metro, being told that Hernandez often takes the Red Line, and so that might be what's delaying her. Says that while we're waiting, they're having some conversations about other court proceeds. Carmen Hernandez arrives. A few minutes later, Judge Kelly's on the bench. Carmen says, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, Your Honor. I was on the Red Line. You might have heard about it. He says, yeah, I did hear about it. Carmen says, yeah, someone either fell on the tracks or they threw themselves on the tracks. I couldn't find an Uber, so I just walked over here. Sorry, I'm late. The judge said apology accepted. The judge says, all right, well, now that we're all here, hopefully that dude's okay, whatever happened on the Red Line. Says, all right, well, apologies accepted. Now, I want to discuss some jury instructions this afternoon. They moved past that. Any issues with your first witnesses, Carmen? She says, no problems here. Prosecutor McCullough weighs in. He says, Your Honor, the cousin of this witness, who Hernandez is going to call, entered the Capitol with Zach Real, and he's been instructed not to discuss the charges that his cousin was charged with. They bring that up. Anything else? Norm Pattis raises his hand. He says, okay, Your Honor. Yeah, just an update. After court last week, he's representing defendant Biggs. Defense attorney says, after last week, we met with the government midday. Remember, Friday was an early day. There was a sick juror again. Tummy aches. The Friday flu was acting up. There may be some additional material, the defense says, that might be useful to the defense that the government told us about on Friday. Says the government has arranged for at least 2, maybe 3 Metro PD officers to be available to be interviewed by us. Interesting. So defense might have 3 more cops that they want to come in and testify. Says there's potential use value in this. We may want some longer breaks than usual, maybe like 25 minutes instead of 10 minutes. Judge says, no problem. We can handle that. Anything else? No, nothing else. Let's get started. All right. The jury gets brought in. Carmen Hernandez is now at the podium. She calls the defense's 5th witness for Real. Your Honor, the defense calls Demetrius Robbins. Demetrius Robbins comes in. Sir, please raise your hand. You promise to tell the truth? I do. God? Yes, I do. Hey, Demetrius, where are you from? He says, I'm from Philly. And are you working? He says, yes, I am employed. What do you do for a living? I'm a manager for something. Roger missed it. He says, did you know anybody else who was there on January 6th? He says, yeah, actually, I'm the cousin of Isaiah Giddings. Another person. Now, this is a very tall black man with a goatee beard. And he says, are you a member of the Proud Boys? He says, yeah, I was. What chapter? The Philly chapter. And how long have you been a Proud Boy? He said, I became a Proud Boy on July 4th, 2020. And just so we're clear on this is a black man, a tall black man who is in what I thought we were told was a very racist white supremacist organization. Just so we're clear about that. Now, drove from Atlantic City, he said, to DC. I came with my sister and 4 of my cousins. What did you do that for? I wanted to see the fireworks. Did you get to enjoy the fireworks, Demetrius, when you were here? He says, no, actually, we did not get to enjoy the fireworks. How come? He said we were wearing Trump shirts. A group of counter-protesters shouted Black Lives Matter at us, and they were hollering in the children's faces. And so we were there to watch fireworks, and some of the kids started crying, and they were calling me a very bad word that I'm not going to be repeating here. And they were calling me a word as well. He says, I believe it was because I was wearing a Trump shirt. 4 people came up and they sheltered the children and they escorted us with police out of the park. They took us to the hotel by Harry's bar. We met Zach Reel there as well. And Zach, my client, the defendant here, he was one of the people who helped my family. They did. How'd they help your family in December? He said, actually, they paid for our hotel stay. We could not leave the area because the counter protesters and the police had blocked the road. Police told us we couldn't leave at that moment at all. And so Zach Reel, a Proud Boy, paid for the hotel for me and my family. He says, that's pretty nice. Have you ever been through something like this before? He says, no, I've never experienced Antifa before. He said, well, what happened after that? He said, well, that evening after this ordeal, we were asked if we wanted to join the group called the Proud Boys. Enrique Tarrio was there, and Tarrio was the one who read him in to the Proud Boys. He said, how'd they read you into the Proud Boys? He said, well, it's pretty easy. We just had to repeat some words. He said, I'm trying to remember what I had to say. Probably a rite of passage ceremony. He had to repeat some sort of a ceremonial process. He said something about being Western chauvinist who refused to apologize for creating the modern world. That's interesting. And so that's all you did? You read the oath and you just became a Proud Boy? Yeah, I became a Proud Boy that evening. At some point, he says, I went back to Philly. And when I got back there was a Proud Boys chapter there. And I had to go through a process to become a Proud Boy. What was that? He said, well, they ask you some questions? He says, sort of. Carmen Hernandez is direct examining Demetrius and says, okay, I want to show you a video. Looks like you're in this video here. Is that right? Looks like a meeting space of some kind. She's having a little bit of difficulty getting the audio to play. He says, Carmen says, do you see this? He says, yeah, that's me right there. It looks like a mild hazing ritual with mock punches to the stomach. And then it's name 5 cereals and then they stop mock punching. He said, it was in an American Legion hall. What's going on here? He says, well, you have to name 5 cereals. They're sort of fake punching you in the stomach. And you have to say, Fruit Loops, granola. You have to say Captain Crunch or whatever you have to say. And lots of drinking. And he gets hit in the stomach. Friday night goes by. Now, Reel is leading the event. Witness points out to Robin's cousin that Isaiah Giddings is in the room too. So were there any hard feelings after all this punching? He says, no. Just a bunch of men who like to drink and have fun? He says, yeah. Now, you went to other rallies with Reel, didn't you, Demetrius? Yeah. And you went to one in Las Vegas, right? Yeah. And he says, well, I went to Vegas with them. I wouldn't say it was a rally, but yeah. He says, I want to show you a photo. Carmen says, I want to show you a photo of what's going on in Las Vegas. Puts a photo up on the screen. He says, what's going on here? It's Robbins, Reel, and Giddings. He says, oh, it's a guy's trip out to Vegas, but we brought our family as well. You guys, what are you doing out there? He says, drinking. We were out there drinking. Any violence on that day? No. Did Reel, my client, Carmen asks, engage in violence that day? No. I want to show you another photo. We see Amanda's in this photo, right? Zach's wife, yeah. What's going on here? Oh, there's Christmas decorations in the back. It looks like we were at their home for Christmas. Well, that's nice. They invited you over to Christmas? What a nice family. Carmen says, now, Demetrius, are you familiar with the Ministry of Self-Defense? That's the Proud Boys Telegram chat that they were in that was the subject of a lot of the government's questioning. He says, no, I don't remember that. You don't remember becoming a member of the chat and filling out an application to join the chat? He says, no, not that I recall. Were you in D.C. on January 6th? No. Yeah, I heard you had a car accident on January 5th. Is that true? Yeah, that's the reason I didn't come. Roger says that didn't seem to be the answer that Carmen expected on that. She says, was there any other reasons you didn't come? He says, well, yeah, another reason I didn't come was apparently there were some Proud Boys that were stabbed back on December 12th, 2020. And Carmen tries again with the chat. He says, are you sure you don't remember asking to become a member of the chat? He says, no, I don't remember, but it's been a while. Well, let me refresh your recollection on this. So you filled out do you remember filling out a form? Maybe I did. Would it refresh your recollection? Here's a form. Does this look familiar to you, your Telegram handle? Yeah, it's Meech. Yeah, it looks like Meech. And she's going through the form, and he says, oh, you remember this form? Yeah, I remember this form. And you have to fill this out, right? And she's going through it and says, did you check this box? I will always act in self-defense, and I will never initiate a confrontation. Did you sign that? Yeah. Now they'll show them a different photo. Here's the photo they're sharing. And says, who are these people? Identifies. So she puts this photo up and says, who are all these people? And he identifies a couple of them. None of them are Zachary Real. So Carmen Hernandez says, boom, not my client. No further questions, Your Honor. She's done. Prosecutor comes back out. Prosecutor McCullough's up. He says, all right, Demetrius. So you ended your relationship with the Proud Boys before January 6th. Is that right? Yeah. And that's because you thought that your beliefs were incompatible with being a Proud Boy. Is that true? Yeah. And you gave away all your Proud Boy gear? Yeah. And you learned that the Philly Proud Boys could be violent? He says that's not correct. You advised Zach Real of a potential doxer before you left. Is that true? He says, no, I don't remember that. But you told Real about a liberal activist at Temple that you knew, right? And if Real told him that he was a Proud Boy, the activist would dox him. You remember that? Yeah. And that was in December 2020. Objection, sidebar. Judge says, okay, we're going to release the jury for 10 minutes. Attorneys, you stick around. They have a brief conversation. Now the attorneys go for 10 minutes. Judge Kelly's back on the bench. Now, don't know exactly what they're talking about, but Judge Kelly comes back and he makes a ruling. He says, all right, this is what I've been thinking about. Now, it's incumbent on the government to share this in a meaningful way with defense counsel for them to be prepared to respond. Having thought about it, I'm dubious this is proper, Mr. McCullough, the prosecutor. I'm dubious this is proper. I don't know what they're talking about here, but I'm dubious too. He says, judge says, mostly because I'm not sure what the relevance of most of this testimony was in the first place, frankly. I guess the point is that the nature of Mr. Real's chapter is not what the government would have us believe. But once we get into a particular statement by Real urging the celebrating of violence, we're treading into 403 territory, he says. Especially something untethered to political rallies. Prosecutor says, yeah, but judge. But Hernandez, she wants to set up the idea that the guys in the Philly chapter were like Elks Lodge, like they were just enjoying manly company, like they were just drinking and fake punching each other in the stomach. She wants to say that Real did not bring a fighting force to D.C., just a bunch of drinking bros. And she says, and the prosecutor says, I've got evidence that refutes that. She's trying to paint this picture that's just a bunch of frat bros out drinking and punching each other. I want to show the difference there. I want to show that they want to violently beat up this doxer, the person who is going to dox them. And the judge says, yeah, but that's not the same thing. Like doxing is not the same thing as we need to show up on J6 and do violence. It's not the same thing. Prosecutor says, yeah, it is. He's saying this man is a threat to us, the Proud Boys, and he's saying that we should respond with violence. This man was eventually added to the chat, and others were in the chat, and they were talking about the past violence, and the prosecutor just wants to talk about it. Anything that resembles violence, the prosecutor wants to get it in because these prosecutors are trying to just beat that into the jurors' heads. Judge says, all right, I've heard enough of it, okay? I'm ruling it out. If you want to take one of these things and show it to the witness and ask if that's consistent with self-defense, you can do that. Hernandez is correcting the record about the chat. Said, I have not found a single time where this witness participated in the chat. I asked about Las Vegas. They said it was not a rally, so I did not open the door to other rallies. Prosecutor says he left the Proud Boys before J6, not before the chat started. He was invited to the chat. The two individuals were not added by Bertino. They were added by Donahoe. They're also members of the chapter. And Hernandez says, Your Honor, I am still downloading what the government just sent me. One document is more than 3,000 pages. I'm not prepared because I'm still downloading this. 3,000 pages. How can you possibly be prepared to answer anything when you've got 3,000 pages that you haven't reviewed on your desk? Prosecutor says, Judge, sorry, we collect all the materials we might use. One of the materials is 3,500 pages, of which we'd use these particular pages, 130 to 133. And they said, the reason we sent over all 3,500, because I'm hesitant to send over a few pages because they asked for the surrounding context. Your Honor, if I give them too little, they ask for too much. So I'll just give them 3,500 pages. Okay. Now, the concept that Hernandez didn't review her client's exchanges with his individuals, prosecutor says, I don't believe that for a second. Judge says, Your Honor, says, look, everybody, I've ruled the doxing stuff out, okay, but the chat stuff can come in. So they can talk about the chat, but not about the doxing chat. Carmen says, Judge, how can we possibly have this chat stuff? He does not have a single post on this. He barely even understood he was in MOSD. And I don't know if she said this in open court or what this is, but Dick Sweats, pronounced differently, might be Sweats, first name Dick. She says Dick is not even in Philadelphia. He's in Lehigh. This Kushnikov guy is not even in Philly. So Dick Sweats is not even in the city that they're talking about. And his brother, Tom freezing my balls off, is in a whole different state. So the judge finally weighs back in and says, look, I think we should have an extended break for lunch. And I should come back at 1:30 p.m. and resume with the cross of the witness. Hernandez can download the documents during this period, and defense counsel can interview the officers, whoever they're making available. So apparently we have another prosecutor, Jocelyn, who I think's new. She's the chief of the section handling conspiracy cases. She's present in the room. We have a new prosecutor entering the game. We haven't heard from old Jocelyn yet. Ballantyne's usually here when we're discussing informants, so the Metro PD officers may relate to Lieutenant Shane Lamond or other intelligence units. Very interesting. Now we're breaking until 1:30. And we're fast forwarding. Judge Kelly's back on the bench. Hope you had a great lunch, everybody. Now, the defense attorneys were working hard because the government just keeps dropping wheelbarrows full of documents, 3,500 pages on them. Defense attorney says, okay, Your Honor, we interviewed the two police officers, and we're going to meet with one more tomorrow. We might seek relief, but we'll talk it out amongst the team, and we'll get back to you tomorrow on this. Judge says, all right, well, we've got an issue here. I need to speak to the parties about something under seal. Roger Parloff says this is like a really under seal. Even though there was white noise before, now they've entirely unplugged the screens and the audio in the media room too. The white noise is actually louder down here in the media room than the courtroom, but the lawyers don't seem to trust that it's sufficient. Wow. And the white noise is literally white noise. It fills the courtroom. They play it over the speakers. It sounds, you can't hear anything. They're turning the screens off. Now, we turn our attention to Roger Parloff. and he's having a family emergency and he has to leave. So we're going to pause there and say a prayer for Roger Parloff's family. Hopefully his family is okay, and we'll give them our warmth and our love and thoughts. Hopefully that is working well. But Brandy Buckman is somebody else who is handling this, and let's see if she has anything further for us. Now, we pick back up. She tells us, right now, the courtroom remains sealed. We left off with Roger, and we pick up with Brandy. Shout out to Brandy Buckman. Make sure you're following Brandy Buckman. She says the courtroom is still sealed. That means the jury is still waiting. Now, this is a group and a judge. She says they can spin off into different directions. It's 3:02 Eastern now, and I have to leave at 4 p.m. Chance that the jury was released early today. They're still sealed. And remember, they were going to take the afternoon off to talk jury instructions at some point during this week. And we're back here for a little bit. Now, unsealed. Roots is speaking for Dominic Pizzola, talking. Judge Kelly is telling Roger Roots for Dominic Pizzola, says, I take your point, but this is an instruction given to every jury in this courthouse. They're talking about jury instructions. Pattis wants there to be an option for jury nullification. He says, I think this is implicitly recognized in our rights of law to nullify proceedings. Pattis says, I join with Roots, and Hernandez wants in as well. Everybody wants the jury nullification in there, obviously. Jaraguay is raising his mic. He also wants jury nullification. We all want jury nullification. Pattis says that there was a second circuit decision. Your Honor, I found this case. They ruled 2-1. Says, I note one dissent. He fires it off to the judge. Judge says, it's a long shot. I'm probably not going to include it, but I'll look at it. Prosecutor says, Judge, look, here in the D.C. Circuit, we have a case from 2020. It notes we have already decided that the Sixth Amendment provides no right to jury nullification arguments. That's binding to you. The circuit has decided there's no right to jury nullification. Prosecutors always want the jury to do whatever they tell them to. They don't want juries to think about nullifying the case, which you have the right to do that, right? You can always say, I think this is unjust, and I'm going to vote to acquit. But they don't want you to talk about that and inform them of that. Roots says it's not jury nullification. Says the jury must acquit if the government doesn't present its case. We're not asking for that. Says, I don't see the daylight between that and a nullification. Kennerson cites another case called Wilkerson. Pattis, they're still talking jury instructions. Pattis says, Your Honor, firmly convinced isn't suitable legal language. Any attention directed away from the reasonable doubt standard dilutes the standard, and I want that phrase deleted. The judge says, well, I'm looking through the draft instructions. On the 7th page, there's a reference to accomplice testimony. He says, I'm going to put that in brackets because Judge Amit in another courtroom called it participant testimony in the Oath Keeper cases. Says the accomplice instruction is teed up as if the government is involved. But this is more neutral. So this stuff is very, very technical and boring. It's not going to translate well in a live thread. Prosecutor says, we think the court's treatment of Judge Maida of this, as Judge Maida did as well, captures the book. Now, the jury is going to have some plea agreement language in the jury instructions. All the defense is fighting that language. Judge says, to the extent that that applies to your witnesses, the government did have an opportunity to cross them and talk about the bias. Maybe that means you don't need the plea agreement instruction after all. You can take out that line. Hernandez says no, and I object to that. If there's a bias instruction, fine, but this line I object to. Prosecutor says, well, look, we don't really care that strongly about it at the end of the day. Pick what you want to do, Judge. We don't care. Judge says, I'll move on. We'll figure it out later. Roger Roots for the defense. He says, Your Honor, this instruction further bolsters Bertino and Green. He says, this is outrageous. saying you can convict on this testimony alone is outrageous. Kelly says, this is the blue book standard. This is what we do every time. This is the plain vanilla instruction. Okay, Roger, take it easy. He said, I think it's horrible. He says, well, I'll look at it. I'll take a look at it. But frankly, obviously, there are ways we all need to work to tailor this thing. When are appropriate, the instructions of the case, but the basic concept is this. Deviating from the red book for no obvious reason is kind of inviting error to some degree. I don't worship the red book or the blue book or whatever, like some Bible root says. Kelly says, yes, that's why I've told you we'll look at it and we'll move away from where it's appropriate. So in many states, you have what are called uniform jury instructions or templates, essentially, for jury instructions. And when you get charged with a crime, you don't want to rewrite the jury instructions every time. So they say, okay, what's, define this and define that. And they just assemble all the components. It's very modular, actually. Assemble all of the modules and put them in place. The judge is saying, well, we're starting from a default template. This is the way we start. And Roots is saying, I don't start from that stuff, okay? I just find what is just. Prosecutor says, we don't have any issues with this. It's an accurate statement of the law. And Kelly tells him, I understand the point you're making, but I don't think there's going to be a winning argument. So she's got to leave for the day, Brandy says. The judge and the parties are still working through the jury instructions. They made it through at least 9 pages. Jury's been excused. All right. And so they're going to hash out the jury instructions. They're back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern time. We're not going to read through them hashing out the jury instructions. We'll just look at the jury instructions. When it's done and we see what they look like, we'll cover that. Now, tomorrow in the morning, there will likely be much more testimony as the witnesses continue to be presented. I don't know what was done under seal. I don't know if those were informants or the Metro Police were there. We also had the head of the informant division was there, Jocelyn, whoever that is. And so she came out. We don't know what happened there. Maybe the DOJ will leak it to somebody over at the Washington Post or the New York Times. And then we'll be able to piece it together tomorrow. But that, my friends, is day 49 of the Proud Boys trial.